Hello, everyone. My name is Lionel Sander from Pembroke Publishers, and thanks for joining us this evening for our webinar with Jen Kelly. Just before we get started, I would like you to know that Pembroke Publishers' head office is situated upon traditional territories of the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of Scugog, Hiawatha First Nation, Alderville First Nation, and the Métis Nation. And the treaty covering this area of land in Toronto, Ontario, is collectively known as the Williams Treaties of 1923. And I wish to recognize the significant contributions of Indigenous peoples across this land. We seek a new relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, one based in honor and deep respect. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for this evening, Jennifer Kelly. Jennifer Kelly works with the Provincial Outreach Program for Early Years, which shortens to POPI or POPI. It is part of a team as a teacher consultant, and this team is located in British Columbia, Canada. Jen has more than 20 years of experience in primary teaching. She completed her PhD through the University of British Columbia with a focus on professional learning for teachers. She has a passion for literacy learning in the early years. Jen is able to infuse theory and practice with meaning when working with elementary teachers. And I think today that's a nice combination as we have her presentation on active reading classrooms, strategies that build language. And I will also say, just as a fellow British Columbian, I know you've had a rough August with all the wildfires and everything, and home for you is where I used to camp with mom and dad and family when I was younger. So it's nice to have the geographical connection, and I'm glad you're safe and hopefully things are settling down. So Jen, I'll pass the virtual mic over to you and we'll get started.
Sure thing. Thanks, Lionel. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here with you for this next little bit to talk about reading, because reading is something I'm so passionate about and I talk about it all the time. And I'm very lucky with my position with the Ministry of Education that I get to work with teachers, educators across British Columbia and talk about reading, talk about what inspires educators to continue their work, what they're motivated by. So I have a very captive audience of people that I get to talk to about reading. And one of my favorite questions to ask educators when I'm working with them is, what do you enjoy most about teaching reading? I get a range of answers. Things like having conversations about books with my kiddos. Oh, that aha moment when, something clicks. Being such a huge, important part of students' life trajectory, like that sense of efficacy, and really getting to know our students as readers. My favorite, when students groan at the end of independent reading time. Isn't that the best, when they just can't put down their books because they're so engaged? So you can see that there's so much passion in teaching reading. And that's one thing that I love about my job, is I get to get into classrooms, work alongside teachers, find out what other teachers are doing around the instruction of reading, and definitely continue those conversations. So it was interesting because as I get to have those conversations with teachers, I'm often looking for new research articles and new models, new literacy frameworks that are out there. And Nell Duke and Kelly Cartwright put out this article called "The Science of Reading Progresses, Communicating Advances Beyond the Simple View of Reading." They put out this article in May of 2021. And it was a really important time for me because I was ready to dive into something. I really, I'd finished my PhD dissertation 2 years prior to that in 2019. And I went on kind of a writing hiatus where I didn't want to be committed to any kind of writing. And I just needed a break. Now, when this article came out and I found out what the active view of reading was, the model that they are proposing, I got really excited about it. And I started talking to people about it because, as I mentioned, I have kind of a captive audience. And other people were getting excited about it too. And it was really hitting the reading research world widely. And it was at that time that I felt, okay, I'm ready to get started again and start thinking about writing and what is exciting about this model, which I'll share with you in a moment. So it was quite funny because my husband went and bought me this book to take with me everywhere I went. And I started writing in it all the time, making notes about what I was noticing in classrooms, how students were responding to different instruction, making notes about conversations that I was having in classrooms with students. And it really got me thinking about this model very deeply. So fast forward a couple of years, or not even a couple of years, a year and a half, I would say, of doing all of this note taking and gathering information and doing some more research into specific parts of this reading model, that Burns, Nelduke, and Kelly Cartwright put out a second article just this past spring or early spring. And now the world is really excited because now this research article describes how they field tested the model and what parts of the model are really effective and how students are responding. So now there's lots of buzz and there's lots of people talking about this model. And I just knew it was the right time to get a book out there that had something to do with this wonderful active view of reading that was becoming so widely known and making people very excited about it. And this was right before spring break when I knew that I had 2 weeks. I rarely have 2 weeks where I don't have anything scheduled, but it just happened to be the stars were aligned. I wasn't doing anything, and I knew that I was going to have to do like a deep clean on my house if I didn't have something to work on. So I thought, no, it's much more fun to start writing a book than to do a deep clean of my house. So that's what I did. I started putting all of those notes together and conversations and making sense of what my experiences had been in classrooms across British Columbia in regards to this active view of reading model. So that takes us forward to contacting Pembroke and going back and forth a little bit, and they were excited about what I was coming up with, and I was excited about it, and I just kept going. Here is the active view of reading model that Duke and Cartwright came up with. And when I talk with teachers about it over the past couple of years, the main thing that they have been saying is, well, it's pretty complicated. There's a lot of different components in that, and I don't know exactly what that looks like in the classroom. So that's what I decided that I wanted to write about. I had all those notes, I had all those experiences, and I just wanted to get things down on paper. I'm going to come back to this model in a moment, but I wanted to explain some key understandings. So how is this different from the simple view of reading model that this was a progression of? Well, it's using a lot of the recent research that we have out there on reading, and the key understandings point to what's beyond word recognition and language comprehension. So what if a student has difficulties beyond those two broad areas that are the broad areas of the simple view of reading? Where do you go next? The second one is that there's considerable overlap between word recognition and language comprehension. And they call those the bridging processes. And they're exciting because when you're working within the bridging process, and that's within that model that I'll come back to in a moment, then you're really working across language comprehension and word recognition and building both of those areas at the same time. So one is really building on another. And the third thing is that there's an important role that active self-regulation plays in reading. Now, this is really exciting, so I'm going to go into that in more depth in a moment because it's a new way to think about reading that really puts the learner, the reader, at the center of their reading experience. So as I mentioned, talking to different teachers, there was the need to make this more practical. And I was actually working with some teachers up in Powell River, which is on the west coast of British Columbia, a small community. And we were in this room and we were looking at literacy frameworks and we were looking at different models. And of course, I brought up the active view of reading. And the comments were, yes, it's great, it's fabulous, there's wonderful things here, but what does it look like in the classroom? And it just so happened that that was the day after I'd signed my contract to write this book with Pembroke. So I said, oh, funny that you would mention that because I'm writing a book. And that was the beginning of, a book being born. So this book that I've written is about the practical strategies, the practical ways that the active view of reading can be played out in the classroom, what it looks like, what students can be doing in different areas of the active view of reading, and really just the practical notions of how does this play out in the classroom. So I'm going to, rather than take a lot of time describing this, first of all, I'd like to show you what this can look like when we're looking at a piece of writing. And hopefully that gives a really good sense of how these parts work together and gives you an idea. So I'm going to move forward here to a piece of writing. So the writing says, lakes are the best body of water to go swimming. The water is cool and clean. Sometimes you can see salmon spawning and gaggles of geese swimming by. My dad says swimming in a lake is better than swimming in a pool because you can open your eyes underwater. The water looks sparkly when the sun hits it. If it is a windy day, you might experience waves. It is always fun to move with the rhythmic motion as the waves toss you around. Okay, so if I'm working with a group of students and I want to teach specific aspects of the active view of reading, I can do so much with just one little paragraph. So for instance, if I'm thinking about word recognition, so in this small little paragraph, I could be examining words such as in vowel teams, such as pool, geese, clean, cool. So we can talk about how to decode those words, and those words help develop the meaning of the overall text. They're very important. Also within word recognition, I can teach some high frequency words like are, the, is, you, to, and with. And these words really help with the sentence structure and the flow of the writing to make sure that it sounds right and it makes sense. They're kind of like the glue that holds writing together. There's also some complex words such as experience, waves, and toss. And those require more comprehension to understand. So we need to know what those mean in the context of the paragraph. So a single approach to word recognition might not be as useful when we think about all the different parts that word recognition really entails. Okay, if I want to look at morphological knowledge, I can look really closely at the word swimming. That's a very important part to the overall meaning of the text. So we can focus on the suffix ing to think about how the word is an action word and it's referred to repeatedly in the text. So it requires a lot of understanding. There's also words like sparkly and windy. And those are similar types of words. So we might point out to students that they're descriptive words, and students might notice that they have Y at the end of the word, and that is consistent with some other words that they know that are describing words. And morphological knowledge really builds with complexity. So it's nothing, so we never want to stop teaching morphological knowledge because as students increase their text complexity, they're going to encounter more and more words that they need to gain morphological knowledge in order to understand the word. Fluency is also important because our students need to know which words we need to group together as we're saying the paragraph or the sentences. So for instance, words like body of water, salmon spawning, gaggles of geese, rhythmic motion. Those need to be said together to really gain comprehension of what they mean. And then going on to vocabulary. So knowledge of words like spawning and gaggles is really going to determine each student's previous knowledge of those concepts of salmon and geese. So we need to perhaps provide some scaffolded support to students who lack the necessary background knowledge and need to have an understanding in order to comprehend this text. So we can do that in the form of oral discussions, before reading the text, during reading the text. We can analyze those new words. We can have great discussions about what those words mean in the context of this paragraph. Okay, there's also another bridging process in the active view of reading that's called graphophonological semantic cognitive flexibility, which is a mouthful. And all it means is letter sound meaning flexibility. So we need our students to approach words really flexibly, especially in the English language, because they need to be ready to consider the meaning of the text and how that they need to have an understanding of the meaning and the sounds to decode words, but that can change depending on the context that we're finding those words in. For example, some of the text in this paragraph can have multiple meanings. For body of water. So it's an unusual phrase for students if they don't have the background knowledge of a large expanse of water, and they need to approach it with some understanding that body does not refer to the human body. When sun hits it, so it refers to touches and not, hand-to-hand combat. Waves toss you around. That may sound really strange to students if they're thinking of tossing a baseball, and that's what their knowledge is. Experience waves. In a lake, due to currents and wind is very different from waving goodbye to someone. So that's where that flexibility comes in. Reading specific background knowledge, this is really helpful because we have certain features in nonfiction that help us to read books or read information with more understanding. For instance, there's bolded words in this text, spawning and gaggles, and that can signal to the reader that those are really important words and they might be somewhere else in the book that they can find out that meaning. Also, there's a sentence in there, my dad says swimming in a lake is better than swimming in a pool because you can open your eyes underwater. So it sets the reader up for a compare and contrast. So that helps them to support the information that is in this paragraph even further. Cultural and other content knowledge. Now, obviously, a significant amount of students' comprehension of the above paragraph is going to depend on their background knowledge about swimming in lakes. So if a student has never swam in a lake or seen a lake, it's going to be really difficult to start to put together concepts like waves, opening eyes underwater, salmon spawning, geese swimming by. So I imagine that lack of background knowledge would be similar to me reading a paragraph about living in a desert. So I would need a lot of background knowledge, additional supports to further that comprehension. Those might be in the form of photographs, videos, diagrams, and again, a lot of conversation. So, given just one little paragraph, look at all of that knowledge, all of that information that can gain understanding and help to teach different concepts through the active view of reading. Tons of learning there. Okay, I'm going to dive back into the model for a moment. So hopefully you have an idea of how all those components can work together and look more deeply at active self-regulation, because I think this is a really important part of the model. As I said before, it puts our students in the center of the reading experience and puts their thinking at forefront of how they are interpreting text and how they're comprehending. So self-regulation is important to the AVR model because it puts students in the active role of navigating their reading rather than being passive responders in their reading process. They need to be active in that process to have all those different things going on in their head that I just mentioned, and to be thinking about reading really, really widely and with many different areas of their brain. And we can help them by teaching them how to do that. And it is complex, and that's why the model shows complexity, because reading is really a complex thing for our students to do. Okay, so a major part of active self-regulation is motivation and engagement. Now, we know that motivation drives engagement, but I also think we know as educators that we can't force engagement on our students. We need to invite them into engagement. We need to give them reasons to be engaged. We need to teach them what engagement feels like. So in this simple anchor chart that I made with students, we just brainstormed, what does it feel like when you're engaged in independent reading? And I used not peer pressure, but peer persuasion or interest in order to get some of my students that were reluctant readers to see how much benefit students that were engaged in reading had in the reading process. So what happened with them when they were engaged in reading, with the idea that maybe it would convince them that they could work on their engagement as well, which is something that we can also teach our students to try out different strategies and work on their engagement. So we talked about, when you're really engaged, you might forget about the time. You don't want to stop. You're picturing a story or a movie in your head, and you just want that to keep going. Maybe you want to take the book out at recess. That was what a couple of the kiddos said. And a feeling of calm where you're just so engrossed in what you're doing that you want to continue doing it. Another area of active self-regulation is executive functioning skills. Now, that is a complex way that we work on our learning, and we work with how to learn, how we are learning, how our brain is helping us learn, all those different things. So working memory is a large part of that, and it allows students to hold important information in their heads so that they can bring that out when they need to. So in terms of reading, that can be, if I'm reading a text and I come to a word that I'm not sure of, I can go into problem solving mode. I can work on my word problem strategies and then go back into the text without losing the meaning of what was going on or the memory of what was going on in the text. In terms of cognitive flexibility, that's apparent when we hold multiple parts of a task in our mind, and we can switch back and forth between them as we need to. For example, if, let me think, if I am working between sounding out something, decoding, and then going back to monitor and make sure it makes sense. So that sense of monitoring what I'm doing, I'm decoding, sounding out, and then does that make sense? Does that sound right in this context? So switching between them as I need to. And self-control is an important one as well. And it'll really allow students to ignore irrelevant information, suppress responses that could distract from a task. That's really important as well. And absolutely, I think we are all guilty of having a little lack of self-control sometimes when we're reading. I can think of sometimes when I've read a whole page and I have to reread it because I've started thinking about my grocery list or something else that's happening, or I see a bird flying outside, and all those different things. And of course, our students are going to have that as well. But we want to teach them different strategies to continue that active self-regulation so that they can continue the important work that they're doing with reading. Okay, strategy use is another really important part of self-regulation. And strategies refers to processes that are mindful, which means that people must be paying attention to them when they're using them. So that's different from skills. Skills are automatic. We get to the point with skills where we're not even thinking of them, that we're not consciously doing the work, the skill. We are doing it with automaticity. So it can be kind of happening in the background. Whereas strategies, we're purposefully bringing them in to the work that we're doing. We're trying them out. We're noticing them. We're paying attention. So effectively using strategic action when reading involves students using executive functioning skills to hold on to that meaning of the text while they problem solve. Otherwise, they may lose meaning of the text. So you can see how that works really well and complements what we're doing with our executive functioning skills. And there's lots of different ways that we can work on maintaining that sense of engagement and keeping and inviting our students into different ways that they can monitor their engagement and continue the learning further. For instance, one thing that I'm thinking about is a really effective way to engage students is to have them teach a friend. So sometimes I would take half of my class, teach them something, for instance, how to use a table of contents. And we'd go over it, we'd talk about it, I'd explain, wow, this is really exciting because you can see exactly what you're going to be learning on these pages in the book. You can also, if you're more interested in learning about what's in chapter 6, you can dive into that. You don't necessarily have to read it front to back like you do so many other books. If they know that they're going to then go and teach a friend that same concept, then they're going to be really motivated to be present, to make sure that they learn so that they can then be the mentor in that situation. Okay. So that's a little brief overview of this active self-regulation part of the model. I would love to talk about all of the parts of the model, but we just don't have time. So I wanted to highlight that because it's a little different from maybe some of the other models that are out there. And I also wanted to highlight one area that's within language comprehension, just to give you a taste of different activities that are in the book and different ways that we can bring in students thinking and actively be cognitively considering different aspects of the books that we're reading, of the text. So I thought I'd highlight theory of mind because I really love theory of mind, so I wanted to highlight it. But really what it is it refers to a reader's theory about what's going on in a character's mind. So it's not just involving what the character is doing or their actions, but it's considering what the character is thinking and the motivations that are guiding some of the character's actions. So you can see how this is a further, deeper connection to characters, a deeper understanding, because they have to use a lot of social understanding and also the understanding of what our own and other people's minds, what's happening in the minds. This is really important as we go further in a complexity of narratives that our students are starting to think about the reactions of characters and why that might be happening. A lot of elementary students focus a lot on the actions, but not necessarily going beyond that. And sometimes they even think that it's, that they shouldn't be because it's not factual evidence. So when I ask them, what do you think might be going on in this character's mind? They say, I don't know. It's not written on the page. And that's where we get into all of the different ways that we can think about what's happening with our character and really dive more deeply into our character's mind. Okay, so a couple of different ways, strategies that you can do that with your students is questions. That's kind of an overall one. Questions are really, really important, and we know that as teachers, absolutely. But I think also it's important for our students to know, especially in the older grades, that questions, they should be different. They should be different. We should have different questions from our students. Our students should have different questions from each other. Questions are as individual as the students themselves. And all that's great. You know, we want different questions because we want to hear different perspectives. So questioning is a really wonderful way to invite um, that kind of sense of curiosity into the classroom. And it's funny because when I think about teaching kindergarten students, they come up with those wonderful questions all the time. They're questioning all the time. And for some reason, the older that our students get, it's harder for them to come up with questions. So the more that we work with our students in that way, the better. One way that I've worked with students is questioning the author. So after reading a book or during reading a book, I might say, if the author, if Jacqueline Woodson was right here with us, what would you ask her? And that is really an interesting way to get our students to think about definitely coming up with those questions, but also that the author is a person, that they wrote this text for a reason, that they are a real person, and that also helps when they're writing to think, you know, I'm a writer just like that author was a writer. I have my reasons to write. I have my identity as a writer. Coming up with rhetorical questions, again, this is really a lot easier with our younger students and a little bit more tricky with our older students. So once students get the idea that rhetorical questions are really wonderful because there's no answer, there's no one correct answer, we can have so much fun with that. So what do you know, having those rhetorical questions and giving our students space to consider beyond the obvious is a really exciting way for them to think about that theory of mind and what might be going on in the mind of our characters. Inferencing, wonderful, because again, we're reading between the lines. We're looking for information that is being portrayed through text, but is not super obvious. Um, I've talked with other teachers who, thinking of a secondary teacher that I know who teaches high school English language arts, and she uses inferencing all the time, or she uses, sorry, children's picture books all the time with her students to work on inferencing so that they can just focus on what's in between the lines. And wordless picture books are wonderful for that because you can't read the words and you have to go beyond. You have to look at characters' facial expressions in the illustrations and look at the non-narrative storyline that's happening. And there's freedom in that to understand through what is happening in a story through a wordless picture book. I love the idea of hands down conversations because it invites real world dialogue into the classroom. So I would teach my students how to have hands down conversations where we, instead of putting up hands and it's a, you know, hand up, answer, response kind of format, students get the idea of what a real conversation can feel like when they're waiting for a way to input their, or a space to input their thoughts or opinions, and when they're listening to other people's thoughts and opinions and building on it or asking questions. So that idea of real world conversations. And the final strategy or activity that I'll get into today with this is getting into the head of the character drama activity. This is a wonderful way to have our students think like a character and think about what might be going on in their minds. So often I would have students brainstorm with me after we read a book. what are all the character traits that you can think of about this character that we've just read about? And we list them and we think about, if that character was in the room right now, what questions would we ask them? And we would take turns being the character in this activity and answering from all of the different things that we found out about the character through their character traits and how they might respond and why they might respond a certain way. So those are just a couple of little nuggets from the book about just that one little area of theory of mind that I wanted to touch on. And of course, we don't have time to touch on all of them, but those are some wonderful ones that I wanted to share with you today. So just to end my formal part of the presentation today, is my hope is that you pride yourself as educators in the important role that you have in many students' lives, and that your efforts have a profound impact on the trajectory of your students' lives. So enjoy this learning journey, slow down, celebrate where students are, and celebrate that you're on this journey with them. And that is where I will hand it back over to you, Lionel.
That's great. Good. Thanks, Jen. That was appreciate that. I was wondering, maybe could we just flip back to the active view of reading, because there was an awful lot in there.
I
And
know, I
and as
know.
always, in an hour, you can only pick pieces out
Yeah.
of that. So maybe just folks can have a second look at that if they haven't had a chance while we just sort of chat for a couple minutes here. Just a couple thoughts came to mind as I was listening, and one was sort of wrapped around this, and then I wouldn't mind shifting a little bit back to some of the practical stuff, especially what you're doing with your outreach work, because I think there may be a few things in there folks might be curious to hear about in terms of what you're doing.
Okay.
But when I looked at the graphic there, the graphic there, I recognize things like word recognition and language comprehension, but the bridging processes, I don't, and maybe I missed it because I was running around a little bit in the background there, but that seems like is that an important piece then for the teacher, for the student? Is it both? I get that they all lead to reading and sort of the importance of the things you talked about, but is in your book, do you spend a bit of time talking about what that is and what that looks like as well?
Oh, for sure, definitely. So I really in the book spend a good chunk on each of the areas of the active view of reading and practical suggestions for the classroom within those areas. And you're right, the bridging process is really an interesting part of this because it not it strengthens both word recognition and language comprehension through the teaching of print concepts, fluency, vocab, things like that. So it's really a high impact part of the model. And actually, I didn't mention this before, but for the people that are really interested in looking at the research behind this model, and that second article that I referenced from Burns, Duke, and Cartwright, they field tested the different aspects of the active view of reading with quantitative results, and bridging processes actually had the highest effect
Hmm.
size for those people who are, into that quantitative research. So they had the highest effect size because it was really building strength in both word recognition and language comprehension through the teaching of those processes. So when you asked who is it important for, I would say it's really important for teachers to know that those are high impact instructional strategies to really focus on that's going to build the other two aspects of word recognition and language comprehension.
So then in terms of it's, let's say in my practice, I was thinking, okay, I'm working with kids and they're reading is in using your book, because there'll be something, if I think I can say this, with every line that you've got there within the three sort of circles in the center, am I looking at working on specific ones more than others because of that effect size? Or I can sort of, oh, I haven't been doing that, I should look at that example and carry on from there. Is there sort of a recommended way to approach the book?
So with the book, so as I mentioned, each part of this reading model has a chapter, as
Hmm.
well as the final chapter 6 really brings it all together as to like
Yes.
what it can look like as a structure together.
Yeah.
But it really is going to depend on the students in front of you, is my answer to that. It's not that you necessarily have to focus on one area more than another, but if you notice that your students are are struggling with some aspect, then we want to make sure that those students are given the opportunity to have further instruction, whether that's through intervention, whether that's through small group work, on those specific skills. So you're going to have students that come into your class even as early as kindergarten with solid print concepts. They know how to navigate a book. They can tell you, where they start reading, where they end reading, what's the difference between a capital letter and a lowercase letter. Those are all print concepts. But some students are going to come into the classroom, or even be in grade 2 or 3, and need to work on those specifically. So then the book has suggestions on exactly how you can work with those students that need that skill. Or, yeah.
Yeah, it's like it just reinforces the importance of background knowledge, but knowing what questions to ask to figure out what background knowledge they have there. So that sounds great. So in terms of what you do for outreach,
Mhm.
it just are you going into classes then, or are you with teachers? And when you're there, are there themes starting to emerge? I know it's early in the school year to even ask that, but this is reading's a hot topic across the country right now, and everyone's got an opinion, as it seems to be in education. And so I like you bringing out the research, because we've got to start with evidence. But do you see some emerging themes this year as we move forward?
Oh, yeah, we are very early in the year.
Yeah.
But so yes, how I work with teachers and work with different districts across BC. So I work with another teacher consultant, actually two other teacher consultants, um, and we provide a lot of different ways to engage teachers across British Columbia.
Mm.
How Poppy used to work was more of a one-day workshop wonder when districts have Pro D days. Maybe we would come in and do a full day session with educators. And we really changed that because of the pandemic. We had to, but it was actually a wonderful silver lining because we moved to a lot of online learning, and we were able to work with a lot more educators in a lot more remote areas of the province. So we do online workshops that we try to make as interactive as possible, that are accessible to everyone within British Columbia or beyond. There's no like border gate.
Yeah.
But also we do a lot of working within, but we call them rural residency programs. So we have a way that we're continuously working with small groups of educators to build that capacity and to continue those conversations and be with teachers in classrooms, um, working alongside teachers, providing demo lessons, providing a lot of the conversation. And that has been really powerful. And we've been, like, as I mentioned, working with our most rural school districts in that way. So those are school districts that would find it really difficult to be able to have teachers attend big workshops down in Vancouver or Victoria. So we go to them, and it's more of a relational learning experience because we will go for like a week at a time, 3 weeks throughout the year, we're working alongside teachers.
Yeah.
And it's really driven by teacher interest, what they want to learn, how they want to learn. And then we can continue that learning throughout the year. We also, what else do we do? We have a lot of on-demand webinars that we have on our website. So those are, we call them our after-school specials that we do live
Right.
with BC educators, and then we just record them and put them up on our website. We, yeah, those
That's
are a lot of, and then yeah, conferences, things like that.
Well, it sort of sounds like there's another book evolving out, in terms of the experiences, because there's, like it's, again, looking at the model in your book, the pieces are there for people to build upon. But I think the power is that slide a little bit later with these, I was 8 or 9 different sort of strategies, and
Mhm.
sometimes just going, oh yeah, I forgot about that one, and bringing that back in, and oh yeah, I haven't been doing inferencing for a while, and I can do that in other subject areas as well, and bring that in to, again, building the background knowledge. I mean, that the next book sounds like it's got the stories of how that all sort of comes together. I'm not trying to give you more work, but maybe get out
Oh,
of deep
I love it.
cleaning. Yeah. That's
No,
great.
writing the book was really empowering. I really liked the process. So it was fun.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is a lot of fun for sure. That's great. Did you have any other sort of final thoughts before I close off with folks? And we have an offer to give to everyone. So I just want to make sure we didn't, in our conversation here, or kind of in reflection, any final closing thoughts on our session today?
Um, I think what you said about reading being such a hot topic, I see that as a positive.
Hmm.
I think the more that we can talk about reading and different ideas that are out there and share knowledge with each other as educators, I think that's a good thing. And I think, when we're collegial and we can have those conversations, even if there's tension involved, I think that that's powerful. Like, the more we can talk about reading, and hopefully this book can be a little catalyst for some more conversations.
Exactly. Yeah, that's great. Good. Well, on behalf of everyone here tonight, thank you very much. It was very interesting, and I like the balance between, in those conversations, having the evidence from the research base, but then saying, hey, here's what it looks like in the classroom. And how you were describing your job, I mean, you sort of sit in the center of those in terms of bringing that forward. So, good luck this year. It's traveling and being around is not an easy lifestyle, but I know the educators, they've got to be happy to see you come in and be able to have that amount of time. I think you said 3 1-week sessions. Like, that's amazing, right? That's what it's supposed to be like. So it's a good news story. So it's nice to hear it as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Lionel.
Good. And everyone, thanks again for joining us this evening. We do have just a little offer here coming out. Just as a little slide out for attending tonight. Yeah, comes up on my screen in the bottom left-hand corner there. But if you're at Pembroke Publishers and you're looking through the new catalog, if you use the code ARC 23, that'll get you $5 off your purchase. And if you click on the Take Me There link, that should take you right to Jen's book, Active Reading Classrooms. And this is a good time to get that $5 off. So thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. It was great to have you on. I don't have a time and date for the next one, but Mary, our fearless leader, has indicated that I might be playing a dual role of hosting and presenting for the next one. So hopefully we'll see you near the end of October. It'd be great to have you join us as well. But thanks for joining us this evening. I know the start of school is always a busy time. But to take a little bit of time here over this hour and talk about a topic, as Jen said, that I think we'll be having conversations not only this year, and we haven't before, but I think they're going to be a little more focused this year. I think she's given us a great deal of information, a nice framework to consider as we move forward. So have a good evening, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks.